Yeah. All right. Until about our grandparents' childhood, or maybe our great-grandparents' childhood, the world was made of wood. Everything from weapons and wheels, barrels and houses, tools for cooking and industry, was at least in part derived from materials taken from the bodies of trees. People were born in oak beds and rocked in poplar cradles and then buried in pine coffins. Now, there's a growing industry that wants to bring back the golden age of wood, starting with skyscrapers. Mass timber is a high-density wood product that is one of the new range of high-tech products vital to the global economy. Mass timber has a particular utopian appeal among some architects and designers. Its supporters predict that the cities of the future will be all wood high-rises. In Finland, the style of forestry is calibrated to reliably turn out the most trees possible. Each week, floats of spruce logs come down the river and canals from North Karelia in the north of Finland and from the Russian boreal forests, bound for markets everywhere in Europe and beyond. So proponents of mass timber see it as not only a chance to decarbonize the construction sector, but also a significant technical upgrade. Many products, such as the paper fluff in diapers, for example, and the bones of skyscrapers, rest on a contradiction. They all rely on the steady, controlled growth of trees because harvests are generally planned decades in advance. For the past 100 years, the system of scientific forestry, which grew up in the late 19th and early 20th century Europe to counter the deforestation, has provided the wood products that a growing population requires. This scientific forestry has provided the wood products that our growing population requires. So that system, however, depends on something that is disappearing: a steady climate and forests that remain where they have always been. And that paradigm is being threatened by the climate crisis. And the climate crisis makes that type of new carbon-locking buildings appealing and attractive. Now, virtually everywhere in the world, the skeleton of buildings would be concrete reinforced with steel. But in Finland, it's often wood. In fact, there's a 12-story building made out of wood, except for a 2-inch concrete slab between each floor. It's all made out of wood. And as I said, 12 stories, so that makes the building the tallest all-wood building in the world, in Finland. But why does Finland have so many trees? Well, after its disastrous World War II invasion of the Soviet Union, the country paid its onerous reparations bill with the wood that it produced. And it converted those boreal forests, those thick forests that it had, into a highly managed landscape. These forests, like those of production forests all around the globe, from Finland to North and South Carolina in the United States, form the base of an enormous industrial pyramid. Now, we need forests to produce an increasing list of consumer products at a time when fossil fuels are very concerning. That means that you will find trees in all sorts of unexpected products. There's a factory in Finland that renders spruce pulp into fibers that can then be woven like cotton. And then this synthetic cotton is used as a pesticide. There's also tampons and diapers that are made from pines in the United States as well. As you can see, very unexpected products. There's also a market in compressed wood pellets from countries in the Baltic states, and those wood pellets are sold to European power plants as an eco-friendly replacement for coal. It's a very green alternative. There's also Alibaba and Amazon. Alibaba and Amazon's insatiable demand for packaging is boosting the cardboard market. So basically right now, planting soft pulpwoods is like planting money. It's very lucrative. When we talk about carbon neutrality in buildings, they only ever mention operational energy, but no one ever talks about the very materials. Concrete and steel require several rounds of breaking, grinding, and melting rocks. It costs a great deal of energy and therefore carbon dioxide emissions. Approximately 8% of the world's total carbon emissions come from cement and concrete production. It releases about half a ton of the dangerous greenhouse gas carbon dioxide, CO2, for every ton produced. So every ton of concrete produced releases half a ton of CO2. And the manufacture of steel, which accounts for around 5% of all emissions, releases nearly twice its weight in CO2. So it's much worse. By contrast, mass timber promises to replace a material that releases huge amounts of carbon with one that could store it. Wood can store carbon. Just so you get an idea, if cement and concrete production were a country, it would be the world's third largest carbon emitter, behind the United States and China. So the spruce logs that I mentioned earlier, the wood used to make building foundations, are largely made of carbon that the trees pull from the atmosphere. That means that mass timber, in theory, could store that carbon long term in the walls of buildings. And on the plantation forest that they come from, new trees would go up in their place. But over time, in addition to the carbon savings, wood is simply a better material for many purposes. It allows a new generation of light, strong structures that are resistant to fire and explosion. Yes, mass timber isn't as strong as steel, of course, but it also doesn't collapse under direct heat as quickly. It's more fire resistant. Most advocates for mass timber say that it is far denser and more fireproof than the kinds of wood used to create structures like Notre Dame in Paris. It was built from 1,300-year-old trees that burned very quickly last year. I don't know if you remember. It burned like cardboard. Actually, recently, there was a workshop with architecture students where they built a mass timber platform and then they roasted a pig on it. It was just an experiment. The wood blackened, but it was not consumed. Those blocks of wood don't just use less carbon than concrete or steel. They also lend themselves better to modern architecture. Wood is a better and more plastic material used to simulate building layouts for architecture students or architects. And that way we can meet customer needs better. Mass timber is much easier to customize and prefabricate than concrete. It allows designers to send plans directly to the factory to be custom built, to be customized. So that translates in turn to faster construction, lower costs for labor, and less disruption for existing cities. So why all that talk about the future of buildings and wood? I just find it very interesting that now that technology is reaching new heights, we seem to always be reverting to very ancient and basic practices in many different fields. Now, recently I read that the buildings of the future will be made out of wood. I see that in medicine, a lot of people, even in the Western world, are reverting back to very ancient, simple, natural and plant-based traditions. I see the rise of a very simple sport like yoga. People are adopting the paleo diet. Paleo, which it says it in the name, it's incredibly old. It rules out all new processed foods. So I think it's very refreshing to see that, yes, we're achieving progress, but as we were saying, we're linguists. Progress means going ahead, going forward, but it doesn't always have to be linear, and it doesn't always have to be very synthetic. We can come back to the very basics most of the time. And if I ever have enough money to get a house built for myself, I'd love it. I'd love for it to be made out of wood. I think it would bring me closer to nature, and in a country like Spain, it probably retains less heat in the summer, but I'm no scientist. Thanks for listening.